Two of the most prepared organizations in the United States have published specific food stockpile lists that most people have never read. One is a federal emergency agency. The other is a church with 17 million members and a century-long tradition of food preparedness. Their lists overlap almost completely, why these two sources matter. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has operated an organized food storage program for its members since the early 20th century, originally developed in response to the doctrine of self-reliance that runs throughout LDS theology and formalized over decades into a specific published program called home storage. FEMA's public preparedness guidance, published through ready.gov and through its community preparedness documentation, arrives at many of the same foods through an entirely different institutional process of modeling large-scale emergency scenarios. The fact that a theological organization and a federal emergency management agency independently arrived at the same core list of foods through completely different reasoning processes is the most compelling validation those foods have. What follows is that list, with the institutional reasoning from both sources behind each item. When two entirely different institutions converge on the same conclusion, the convergence itself is worth taking seriously as a signal. Food 1. White rice. White rice is the first item on both lists and the most foundational calorie source in the entire food storage program. The LDS Home Storage Program specifies hard white rice as part of the grains category and recommends approximately 300 pounds of grain per person per year, with white rice explicitly included as a primary storage grain. FEMA's extended emergency food guidance references shelf-stable grains as the caloric backbone of any emergency food supply, and white rice's combination of 30-year sealed shelf life, confirmed by Brigham Young University Food Storage Research, 2,900 calories per pound, and zero preparation complexity beyond boiling water makes it the item that both organizations point to when explaining where to start. The LDS Home Storage Centers, which are warehouse facilities the church operates in major cities across the United States, where members can purchase food storage items at or near cost, consistently identify white rice as the item sold in the highest volume among all products they carry. At LDS Home Storage Centers, white rice consistently outsells every other product, which reflects decades of member experience with what actually gets used. Food 2. Hard wheat berries. Hard winter wheat, or white wheat berries, represent the second pillar of both programs, and the one that most people outside the LDS tradition have the least familiarity with. The LDS grain category allocation of 300 pounds per year was specifically designed around wheat as the primary grain, because whole wheat berries, sealed in an airtight container store for 25 to 30 years without meaningful nutritional loss, while flour milled from those same berries degrades within months. FEMA's preparedness guidance for extended emergencies references calorie-dense, shelf-stable staples as the foundation of a supply that needs to remain functional for months rather than days, and wheat berries satisfy that requirement more completely than any milled grain product. The practical gap for most households is the absence of a grain mill, which the LDS program addresses directly by recommending that families who store wheat also own a manual grain mill for producing flour on demand from their stored grain supply. For most households, a manual grain mill is the single most valuable piece of equipment that transforms a long-term wheat stockpile into something practical. Food 3. Dried beans and lentils. Dried beans and lentils represent the protein and fiber backbone of both programs and the item that makes the entire grain-centered food storage plan nutritionally complete rather than merely caloric. The LDS program specifies 60 pounds of legumes per person per year across the full legume category, which includes pinto beans, black beans, kidney beans, navy beans, lentils, and split peas. FEMA's extended preparedness documentation references protein sources specifically and notes that a combination of grains and legumes provides a nutritionally complete protein profile without requiring animal products, which is relevant for large-scale emergency scenarios where meat-based protein sources may be unavailable or unaffordable for an extended period. Lentils deserve specific attention within the legume category because they cook in 15 to 20 minutes without soaking, which becomes a meaningful fuel efficiency advantage when cooking fuel is being rationed during a prolonged emergency. Lentils are the LDS program's recommended starting point for families new to legumes precisely because the no-soak, fast-cook characteristic lowers the preparation barrier. Food 4. Rolled oats. Rolled oats occupy a specific place in both programs as the dedicated breakfast grain that provides a different meal experience from rice or wheat while delivering comparable caloric density. The LDS grain allocation explicitly includes oats, and the church's home storage centers stock rolled oats alongside wheat and rice as standard long-term storage items. FEMA's preparedness guidance notes the importance of food variety for sustained morale during emergency situations, and oats represent the lowest friction variety addition available in the grain category because they require no grinding, no special preparation knowledge, and no equipment beyond hot water to produce a complete and filling meal. Brigham Young University's long-term food storage program has documented rolled oats sealed in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers maintaining quality for 20 to 30 years, which puts them in the same shelf life category as rice and wheat rather than in the shorter-term category of most processed grain products. The LDS program allocates grains across wheat, rice, oats, and pasta proportionally based on how they function differently in a long-term meal rotation. Food 5. Non-fat dry milk powder. Non-fat dry milk powder is the item on the LDS list that most clearly reflects the program's nutritional sophistication because it addresses the dairy and calcium gap that a grain and legume-centered diet creates without providing any refrigerated dairy alternatives. The LDS program specifies 16 pounds of non-fat dry milk per person per year, which represents the calcium and vitamin D provision that cannot easily be obtained from any other shelf-stable food source. FEMA's extended preparedness documentation references nutritional completeness for scenarios lasting longer than a few weeks, and specifically identifies calcium as a micronutrient that requires active planning to maintain in a shelf-stable food supply. Non-fat dry milk powder packed in nitrogen-flushed cans or mylar bags with oxygen absorbers has a confirmed shelf life of 20 to 25 years, and commercial preparedness-grade products from brands including Augustin Farms carry 25-year shelf life guarantees backed by third-party testing. The LDS program specifically prioritizes non-fat dry milk for calcium provision because no other shelf-stable food delivers equivalent calcium at reasonable storage volumes. Food 6. Salt. Salt is the item that both organizations treat as infrastructure rather than food, specifying it separately from the food categories because its function in the program extends beyond seasoning into preservation, fermentation, and medical application. The LDS program specifies 8 pounds of salt per person per year, which is a quantity that reflects its role not just as a condiment, but as the primary preservation medium for meats, vegetables, and dairy products produced through the gardening and animal husbandry activities that the full LDS self-reliance program envisions alongside the food storage component. FEMA's preparedness guidance addresses the need for cooking staples that make stored food palatable and functional, and salt occupies a foundational role in that category that no other single ingredient matches. The indefinite shelf life of sodium chloride makes it uniquely appropriate as a long-term storage item because it requires no rotation, no special packaging, and no maintenance across any storage period. The LDS program's specific 8-pound annual salt allocation also accounts for traditional food preservation methods, including meat curing and lacto-fermentation. Food 7. Honey and white sugar. Honey and white sugar represent the LDS program's 60-pound per person per year allocation for the sweetener category, and the reasoning behind that allocation goes significantly beyond providing sweet flavors to a stored food diet. Both honey and white sugar have shelf lives that, under proper storage conditions, are effectively indefinite, which distinguishes them from most foods and makes them appropriate as genuine long-term storage items rather than rotation items. Sugar provides readily available glucose that the body can use immediately for energy during high-stress physical activity, while honey provides the same caloric function alongside documented antimicrobial properties that make it useful in wound care and food preservation applications. FEMA's preparedness guidance references caloric, density, and comfort foods as components of a complete emergency food supply, and honey and sugar, together, address both categories while requiring virtually no storage infrastructure beyond sealed containers kept dry. The LDS recommendation for both honey and sugar reflects that they serve overlapping but not identical functions in a complete food storage program. Food 8, vegetable cooking oil. Vegetable cooking oil represents the LDS program's 10-pound per person per year fat allocation and the single most calorie-dense item in the entire food storage program at 9 calories per gram. FEMA's preparedness planning acknowledges that caloric needs during emergency scenarios, particularly during scenarios involving significant physical labor for shelter maintenance, evacuation, or resource collection, can substantially exceed the 2,000 calories per day that most preparedness calculations use as a baseline, and cooking oil is the most efficient way to increase caloric density in a prepared meal without proportionally increasing food volume or water requirements. Vegetable oil stored in a cool, dark location maintains quality for 1 to 2 years without refrigeration, which makes it a rotation item rather than a multi-decade storage item. But its caloric importance to the overall program justifies the regular rotation cycle it requires. Vegetable oil's 1 to 2 year quality window makes it the primary rotation item in the LDS program, purchased regularly and consumed before it degrades. Food 9. Pasta. Pasta is included in the LDS grain category and appears in FEMA's extended preparedness guidance as a carbohydrate staple that provides dietary variety within the grain category while requiring minimal preparation skill and no specialized equipment. Pasta's 2-year shelf life at room temperature without any special sealing requirements makes it one of the most accessible long-term storage items available, and its versatility across meal formats, from simple boiled pasta with salt to complex mixed dishes incorporating canned protein and vegetables, makes it a morale item as much as a caloric one. The LDS program's emphasis on food variety as a component of long-term dietary sustainability reflects an understanding that sustained adherence to an emergency diet over weeks and months requires that the food be genuinely palatable rather than merely nutritious, and pasta does more work per pound toward that goal than almost any other grain product in the program. The LDS program's broader understanding that a food supply must produce meals people will actually eat rather than just survive on is what separates it from purely caloric approaches to emergency food planning. Every serious food storage program converges on these same items because the logic of shelf stability, caloric density, and nutritional completeness is identical, regardless of whether the planning organization is theological or governmental. Subscribe for the next video on exactly how much of each item you need per person.